Okay, we had gotten through most of chapter 7, if I remember right, the last time we were here. We left off, if I remember right, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but common thought was, why can't we just enjoy life, do kind of what we want to do, and then wait until the tribulation time to get saved? And we talked about the common thought of being that, and we, I think, came to the conclusion it's not that simple. When you consider the fact that we have heard and not received during the time before the Great Tribulation, lack of God's calling, and the concept of the deluded mind when it comes to the Antichrist. And I think that's where we got to. Is that right? That sound familiar, vaguely familiar to anybody? Okay. I want us to pick back up in chapter 7 with the last two verses. If somebody would read those, verses 16 and 17. We'll end up that chapter.
They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat, for the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, and shall lead them into living fountains of waters, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes.
Okay. So there's a shift from the carnal to spiritual out of the Great Tribulation, and then it says, quote, for them no more tears, but for ours not until the great white throne judgment. And then we'll talk more about that in chapter 21, so we're not quite ready to dive into that. But we are ready to move into chapter 8. Now, I'm going to go back there and change the slide. Give me just a second. Sorry about that. I miss folks when they're not here. Okay. You'll have to stand a certain way not to get the thing to work. If someone would, let's open up chapter 8, read verses 1 through 10. I do want to say this before we do that, and I've got it up on the screen, but note in seals 1 through 6, man has been allowed to run to and fro. That's all about the change. We're going to start seeing some things that we don't, some more things we don't necessarily want to like to talk about, but it's coming. Verses 1 through 10.
And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there were given unto him much incense, and he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with a fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. And they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters.
Okay, thank you. Verse by verse. Verse 1 makes reference to there was a silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I put this up there just for illustration purposes, but the type of quiet that's being symbolized here is not just people playing hush hush. This is the type of quiet that comes with a verdict, or anticipating what's coming next, anxiousness about what's coming next. This is what's going on in heaven at this point when the last seal is open. So one author describes it much like being in a courtroom waiting for a jury to come back with a verdict. Pretty good explanation. And until now, heaven's been filled with praise. So verses 1 and 2, we're seeing a shift. Verse 3, it talks about an altar. Another angel couldn't stood at the altar. I'll get it out in just a minute. Having a golden censer. This is a sacrificial altar, not one of praise and worship. Then there's a golden altar that's mentioned, a place of prayers for the saints of all ages. So down through the ages. Verse 3 and 4, verse 5. And the angel, verse 5. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and earthquakes. We're starting to see judgment being passed upon the earth itself, not man yet, but upon creation. That will trickle down to man. The opening of the seventh seal begins as the sounding of 7 trumpets. You got 7 angels with 7 trumpets. These these trumpets are alarms of war. That's what we get into in verse 6. And as I said just a few minutes ago, the thing that's spinning the most wrath right now is the earth itself, not man. Now, man's going to suffer the consequences of the earth being in turmoil, whether it's vegetation or shipping or whatever, that's going to be disrupted with all this. But still, God has not cast his wrath upon man directly. So being an orderly God, he begins to destroy his creation in order of creation, as I said, except for man. Verse 7, the first angel sounded. Hail, fire, and blood. At this point, 1/3 of all trees and grass are going to be destroyed or divided. If you can just imagine how dependent we are on grass and trees for a number of things. All of a sudden, 1/3 of that's is gone. Verse 8 and 9, the second trumpet sounds, and 1/3 of all the seas become blood or death.
I'm making so much noise.
I am.
That's going to be the door everybody's ready going in and out of it. So if we can imagine 1/3 of all the seas becoming as blood or death, I can't fathom that. I can't fathom a lot of what goes on in the book of Revelation. It's hard to wrap my head around a lot of things that are gonna transpire. What's gonna be affected if the seas start getting tampered with?
We won't have anything alive there, no fish, no shrimp, no nothing. All the algae, everything will be gone.
Right. Right. How does that affect us?
Food,
Food, rain, precipitation.
rain,
It's
yeah,
the circle of life.
affects our life big time.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. What you just said, about the, rainwater.
Right, I ain't thought about that either.
They mess up all the air currents.
Right.
And it's not even started yet. Now, at this point, when the third trumpet sounds, one-third of all the waters become poisoned. At this point, man does begin to die, but here's the kicker. Not only as a result of nature's processes, but God's wrath has not begun on man yet. Again, man will die. Men and women and children will die as a result of these changes that take place just in our environment. Someone read verses 12 and 13.
And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened. And the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of their voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound.
Thank you. So, 1/3 of the sun is gonna go out, 1/3 of the moon is gonna go out, and 1/3 of the stars burn out. Now, we know that we've already talked about how vegetation and life is affected. What kind of changes can you expect to see without sunlight?
Things gonna die.
Everything will die.
There'll be no vegetation.
No vegetation, weather,
Be
It'll be
confusion
a lot
of
colder.
animals.
It'll get a lot colder.
get a lot colder. Anything else? It just trickles. So we'll go from 24 hours, 24-hour shift into 10 to 12 hours of light. We're gonna go from that to 72 hours or 2.5 to 4 hours of light. That's a big chunk. It's a big chunk. And again, I don't wanna be here to see that. So far, 7 seals have been opened and 4 trumpets have sounded. Any questions so far? Any other comments? If not, we're gonna go into chapter 9. Or 8. 8 or 9? 9. I promise you, I read through my lesson. I'm staggering all over everything now. We'll go into chapter 9. And in verse 1, the 5th trumpet sounds, God begins pouring out his wrath upon mankind, which is viewed as his greatest creation. Let me get someone, if they would, to read for me. let's do verses 1 through 8, starting out.
And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their face were as faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as teeth of lions.
Okay, Parker? Yeah, that's fine, appreciate it. All right. Give me a second, go back here and click it again, Joe. I should have tied these together instead of separating. So the fifth trumpet sounds, God against pouring his wrath out upon mankind. The first verse talks about a star falling. This person is believed, or it's should be symbolic of a person who's demonic. Not necessarily Satan, but demonic. How do we know that? Well, to him was given the keys to the bottomless pit. In verse 1, but it also mentions, well, I've got this up there too to help explain why it's demonic, but not Satan. We know that it can't be Satan because Satan is not omnipresent, where he can't be in every place at one time like God can. And ever since about chapter 5, he's been in possession of the Antichrist. So it can't be Satan himself. So one of the demonic forces is what's been described with a star. The bottomless pit that it talks about is also called the abyss, or known as the abyss. It's a place of chaining or holding cell for demons. Anytime that word abyss or bottomless pit is mentioned in the scriptures, that's what it's talking about. Scorpions. Talks about scorpions being loosed. They inject a sting that inflicts excruciating pain throughout the entire body by way of the bloodstream. They seldom kill. I put in there, they just make you wish you were dead. And then in verse 4, God's command to the demons of the abyss, they are unleashed with freedom to commence harm to mankind. Verse 5 lets us know that they're bringing literal torment upon people for a period of 5 months. Now, how do we know it's 5 months? Because it also talks about the locust in biology 102 or 110 or whatever it is. we go back to looking, the lifespan of a locust is 5 months. So, it even mentions 5 months in the scripture, but we know it is because of the lifespan. You know what's scary here is in verse 6, it talks about all those days men shall seek death and shall not find it. Shall desire to die and death shall flee from them. No matter what a person does during that time, the spirit and consciousness remains intact. So I've often wondered if a person tries to kill themselves, during this time, are they successful? According to the scripture, the mind and the spirit and consciousness will remain intact. So they seek death, but they can't find it. Death flees from it. But there'll be that much pain associated with scorpions and locusts. In verse 7, demons have power and might. The golden crown that it talks about reflects only temporary rulership. In verse 8, it talks about the hair of women. That's symbolic of seductiveness. Teeth of lions symbolizes the inflicted pain, fear, and tearing of flesh. Verse 9. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of the wings was as sound of chariots, and the horses running to battle. Iron breastplates symbolize indestructibility. Verse 10 talks about the trails of scorpions. Unbearable pain once again. And I think that's where we got to. Verse 11. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon. I believe that's how you pronounce that. But in the Greek tongue, his name is Apollon. One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more thereafter. Once again, the leader in charge of inflicting pain and spirits on those who have disobeyed. And the reference for that, if you need to look back and find reference for it, is in Ephesians 2 and 2. 2 more woe trumpets remain. I want to give you a visual of the river Euphrates. This river separates most of the Middle East and protects Israel. The reason I'm showing you a picture of this is because in the sounding of the 6th trumpet, the Euphrates River dries up. What significance does that have? What happens if the Euphrates River dries up? Or what can happen?
Release of Satan, or demons.
One more time.
The release of the demons.
Well, the main thing that's happening here is Israel's kind of standing naked. They don't have the protection that the Euphrates River has provided for them through the years. So, something else that I found interesting today, there's a dam has already been constructed, and the Euphrates River has dried up once before when they tested the dam. So even the technology's already there. If somebody wanted to dry the river up, they could do it okay? The technology's already there. And that dam was built several years ago. While the rise of global temperatures and ever-changing climate, the possibility of rivers drying out, have only increased. So even without the dam, you think about how, we've been in a moderate drought here in this area. It's worse a little above us up in Illinois and around those parts. But I think about the number of ponds that we drive by and used to be a pond there, and now it's a little puddle of water, That's just due to climate change. That's just due to lack of rain and the temperatures. So the technology is there and the possibility is there even through just basic, earth stuff. Okay. We should note too that this is also the area that's believed to be the origin of man over in that part of the country. Seems like God, when this is all happening, He's bringing it back home. He's bringing it back where it started. Okay, that's just more factual stuff. Many believe the Garden of Eden was located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Again, we see God in His entirety, totality, in His orderly fashion. The birth of man and the destruction of man become one and the same. Okay, if someone would read verses 15 through 21,
And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000 outnumbered the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these 3 were the third part of men killed by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads which with them they do hurt. How far did you say to go? I'm sorry, 21.
21.
And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts.
Okay. Now, what's taking place in verse 15, only God knows the time of when this is going to transpire. But there's approximately 400 million slain by this time. 400 million have been killed. That's a statistic and a half. In verse 16, and the number of the army of horsemen was 200,000. So, I believe, if my calculations are right, that's 200 million.
Maria's nodding.
Yeah, I agree.
200,000. Yeah. That's right, we got a mathematician in here.
That's called that.
I'll have to watch myself on these numbers. Do what?
I don't know if I'd call it that, but
Well, math teacher.
there you go.
All right. Verse 17. What's happening here is just pretty much everything and anything that's in its path is being destroyed. The purpose is trying to get to Israel. trying to destroy Israel. I got news for them, that's not gonna happen. There's gonna be a lot of attempts at that. But it's not gonna happen. In verse 20, the seventh trumpet sounds. And we see plagues. Plagues, these particular plagues are brought about by the death of so many people. There's not gonna be a place to properly bury all these people. So what's gonna happen is just the rotting flesh and what takes place, you know, with decomposition and so forth, is gonna lead to disease and famine of the people that are left. But here's the thing. God has given opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, even back in, we were talking about the 7 churches. You know, he said if they just repent and try to change their ways, and things would be a whole lot different. But they wouldn't do it. They just kept going about their life the way it is. Even with all this happening, the remaining people will still refuse to repent. Of course, you got the Antichrist on the scene. He's not helping matters during this particular time. There's demonic worship that's talked about here. Do we have demonic worship? Is it here? Is it in our country, our home, or even our hometown? I promise you it is. When I worked for Baptist Hospital, 20-some years, I saw it quite frequently, let me put it that way. And it was in teenagers. We had an adolescent unit there at one time. And I'm not talking about people that is into, you know, gothic stuff and paint their fingernails black. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about true devotion, you know, in their heart to Satan. Now, I never witnessed anything with the adolescent population or the adult population that of anything like The Exorcist or anything like that, you know, where the heads spun around, they spit out pea soup and all that stuff. But a devotion in their heart to the worship of Satan. And the scary part was they had limited knowledge about what they were even doing. They didn't realize, I don't think, fully what they were offering to enter into their life. And they were as screwed up as Leon's lawnmower. I mean, they just were. Sad. But yes, it is here, and it's in our hometowns. Certainly in our country. And verse 21 talks about murderers. One of the other things that I did in my career is I worked for the prison system. And I worked down at Henning, down at the old Fort Pillow for a little while. Then I transferred and I worked over in Lake County. And, you know, our Brother Tom, in his speaking last night, brought out, you know, salvation is for anybody. And it is. But there's some scary folks. There's some mean folks, let me put it that way. There's some just downright mean folks that it's going to take more. It would take more than me to reach them. The Holy Spirit would have to be working on them to start with in order for me to get through to them. Because I worked with that population. But the number of inmates in prisons is astronomically higher today than it has been. 10.35 million people in the world are in the prison system, and the majority of those, 2.2 million, are in the United States. took a trip to Mexico one time, and my wife and I did. Went to Cancun. Now, I realized when we got there that I was not seeing reality. What I was seeing was commercialized stuff. You know, it had been built up for tourists and whatever, but I wanted to see how people really lived. And so we chartered this little van, and the driver took us out several miles out into the country to show us how people really lived. And I'll never forget this. There was a block building. Most of them lived in block buildings. And I say blocks, I mean concrete blocks, you know, foundational blocks. They just stacked them up, and occasionally, you know, we'd go by and we'd see a little pile of rubble, and then another little pile of rubble, then another building with blocks and just some timber, you know, thrown over the top of it. No closed in walls or roofs or anything. And I asked about what these piles of rubble were, and he said, well, that's just generation to generation. It's where that tells you how many generations of people that live here now have lived here in the past. They just, when everything rotted down, they tore it down and set up and built another one right behind it. So I may be looking at 3 or 4 generations. But anyway, what I'm getting at is one of the buildings we went by did have a roof on it. And it was as modernized as you could get for that area. And I asked the guy, I said, what's that over there? And he said, well, that's our prison. And it may have been as big as this room. And I said, you're kidding, that's a prison? And he said, yeah. He said, there's the guys that are in there right now just got a little rough like Saturday night, you know, got picked up and thrown in there, trying to teach them a lesson. But they don't have the type of incarceration rates that we have, because they still live under the old law down there, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. So if you murdered somebody or attempted to murder somebody, they just killed you. Problem solved. You know, they didn't have extensive stays in prison, a lifespan, and I'm not advocating either way. I'm just saying the United States of America has got a problem when it comes to putting people in prisons and just housing them and leaving them there for a lifetime.
Or letting them out all the time.
What's that?
Or letting them out all the time.
Well, that's true too. It seems like they go from one extreme to the other, to lock everybody up and let everybody out. And the reason they do that is for the obvious reason is the prison system can't hold them. And the funds aren't there to keep building prisons. So, but anyhow, and unfortunately, the incarcerated population, I should say, is getting much younger. West Tennessee State Prison, down in Tiptonville, is the only prison in the state of Tennessee that houses juveniles. There aren't any more. So whoever acts out in Middle Tennessee or East Tennessee or wherever, it gets in trouble, and they have to go to prison, they come to Lake County. I don't know if you do that or not, but I had the opportunity to see pure evil. I'm talking kid, 16 years old, had a whole life ahead of him. He burned up his grandmother in the house because she took his cell phone away from him. He burned her to death, he killed her. They can sit and talk to you about it, just like I'm talking to you about it. It's just a matter of fact. Why did you do this? Why did you kill your grandmother? Well, she should have my cell phone. Okay? You know, and there's no incentive to change. You know, they've got programs down there, but anyway, I better get off that kick. given that, is it, here's a question for you, is it truly in the hearts of children to murder? Is that a natural thing, children, is it truly in their hearts to murder? I got a lot of,
Does that go back to the nature versus nurture argument maybe?
yeah, that'll be argued from now until this is over, so. If we say no, then the casual factor can only be demon forces at work and at large in our population today. And I do believe that they're at work.
I think a whole lot of it is just generational. You know, Meredith works with kids all the time, and she works with families and their kids and their kids. The lessons are never learned. They're just in the system. They learn how to play the system, work the system. So nothing ever gets
Changed.
right. No one's ever held accountable, and the fear of God put in them that this is going to be bad for you. You know, so what? Send me to jail. You know, send me to court. They'll just smack me on the wrist and I'll be back. You know, that is the mentality that we deal with. And when you take order away and accountability away, this is what you get.
Sure.
We got a whole world of it.
Well, we got 60,000 right now, youth
Yeah.
that are in prison.
Anybody who watched the kids in the streets, you know, what was it, last year or the year before? There was absolutely no fear. They didn't care what they broke. They didn't care what they torched. It just did not matter. There was absolutely no fear in anything that they did.
Well, I'm sure, I'll pick at Maria again, but I'm sure you see some of these unfortunate kids, you know, that are in the school system, and you can almost, you don't want to label them or anything like that, but you can almost handpick and put your finger on the ones that are gonna have trouble.
Yeah, and you can see that generational
Right.
slide in school. And what we find often is the ones that are doing those things that are gonna end up getting them in prison as a juvenile. Usually that no fear concept is brought on by some kind of mind altering drug.
Right.
So it's almost as if that has caused a no fear concept. I don't care, do it, what are you gonna do? What, you know, no consequences, not thinking about that because my mind is being altered by what I'm using.
Well, I mean, think, you, from the psychologist standpoint, somebody 16, their brain development at that age, how much more of an influence would stuff like that have on somebody that young?
Yeah.
Their brain chemistry at that age, how much more would it affect them?
Yeah, you know, but, you know, I heard, and I'm sure you hear, well, I'm bipolar.
Yeah, tell them I
I hear a lot of times, I'm bipolar, you know that.
I used to tell them I was tripolar, and just get a reaction out of that. But I'm not saying anything about that, I'm not poking fun at all, because it is a legitimate disorder. But even if it's true, and most of the time it's not, but even if it's true, there has to come a time where you become accountable for your actions. Because even in those, even a person who's got a mental illness, like bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, whatever, a person who has those things has peak moments that they can look back and observe their behavior and think about what they did. But it's not normal. It's just not normal.
Well, I have
You
so many
know,
parents that think that they keep taking them back to the doctor and taking them back to the mental health center and saying, okay, you gotta change your medicine, like, you gotta change it, you gotta change it. And it comes down to, you know, part of that behavior, medication is not gonna solve all that. It's not gonna solve every problem. It's just
But the
not.
biggest thing with all that is people don't spend time as families anymore. It's easy to hand them a phone, hand them a tablet, turn on the TV, and not spend time as a family with those kids. Used to, kids acted up and they got their butts popped, or, you know, that's not the case anymore.
Well, and I have
you
very
also
few
just
nuclear
shove the
families.
medicine down and
Yeah.
zombie them out, then you don't have to deal with it.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. It's easier to get them a drug and
Right.
zone them out than
I
it
mean, I have
is
some
to.
kids that are on ungodly amounts of medication, 5-6 pills a day.
But I bet if you go back and look, honestly, how many of the people in those situations, those young adults, have ever been in a situation like this where they're attending church and they actually know the long-term consequences of what they're doing?
Very few, I've been doing this 22 years, and very few of my families attend church.
That's what I'm saying. They don't understand the consequences of, no, I may not get in trouble with law enforcement. What is my long-term consequence for doing what I'm doing?
But a lot of teenagers nowadays are into that. I'm an agnostic. I don't believe in God at all.
That's what I'm saying, but they've never been around it to understand.
But they want to mock
But
it.
it's all been happening out.
Well, then you talk about like generational too, like, you know, like Mom and Meredith and everybody talking about, you know, you wonder, sometimes I wonder from a spiritual aspect, was there something in that mind somewhere that changed? Did somebody in the generation come across something demonic, and did that change the alter the whole generation? You know, is there something in them that like somebody got into something, you know, generations down the line, that it's kind of stayed with their family this whole time?
Yeah. Well, I got us off on that.
Sorry.
No, but we're talking about this. We're talking about how many young people are in the prison system today. Around 60,000 in the United States alone. There's a ministry to be had there, and you know, I always figured that if you can't reach them in the prison system, I don't know where else you'd reach, because they're a captive audience. They ain't going nowhere. It's not like they can just decide to relocate, you know. But still, it's a very difficult population to reach. But in the midst of all this happening, these are the kind of folks that are out there taking advantage of all the happenings, you know, that are going on. I think we probably better stop. I've got almost 25 till. But I appreciate your comments. A lot to be discussed. If you, I didn't want to tell you, I've got a whole bunch. If anybody wants to use that, I can set it. I can actually set it back here on the ledge if you want to walk by and just pop holes in what you got. Set it on something solid.